Well, my clock says it's the top of the hour here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome in, everyone. My name is Aida Awad, and I'm one of the three conveners of this webinar series, along with Ed Roback at AGI and Carla McAuliffe at Nesta, the National Earth Science Teachers Association. I'm happy to be here starting off our 5th webinar season. So amazing that we've been at it this long, and those of us who have been working with NGSS implementation in the Earth and Space Sciences for now more than 5 years, and some of us even significantly longer than that. So thanks for supporting this webinar series. We're happy to kick off our 5th webinar season. In the middle of the screen here, you can see those Zoom tools. So again, they're at the bottom of your screen. If you hover over the very bottom of the screen, you should be able to access the chat box in particular. It's a great place to enter your thoughts and comments throughout today's webinar. Matt, do you have control of the slides? Great, can you push forward one, please? Thank you very much. As I said, there are 3 sponsors of this webinar series, NAGT being one of the 3, and NAGT is kicking off their NAGT webinar series program this year with webinars from a number of different groups within the NAGT organization. So you can see some information there, including a link to the full schedule and the archives of all of the webinars. So please go ahead and click on any of those or hit those. And if you miss those during this webinar, you can come back to them in the recorded version. The slides will be available after this webinar on the webpage, or you can go to nagt.org and search for the webinar series. You'll find that information there. Matt, you want to go ahead and move forward one? Thank you. All righty, so this webinar is going to be recorded. And before I go to that, I just want to give Carla McAuliffe a second to jump in here on behalf of Nesta. Carla, do you want to jump in and give us a little bit of information about Nesta?
Sure. I think the slide did not get in here in the front end, so we'll look at it at the end. But likewise, the National Earth Science Teachers Association offers a number of webinars, many in consultation with the National Association of Geoscience Teachers. But there will be a slide about that towards the end, and I'll put the URL in. We actually have a webinar this evening, a second one at 8 p.m. Eastern. So that information will be at the end. But we're happy to have you here.
Thank you. And Ed, do you want to jump in and give us a quick introduction on AGI? Okay, we'll go ahead and skip forward. Maybe Ed can come in later in the webinar today. All right, Matt, do you want to push the slides forward one, please? Thank you. So today's webinar is going to be presented by Matt Krehbiel, who is the Director of Science at Achieve. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, please type your questions and thoughts into the chat as we go through the webinar. We'll have time for Q&A following that webinar, and we'll also be giving you the link to our post-webinar survey. And we really appreciate you giving us feedback in that survey. I'm going to move forward one. Upcoming webinars, October, we do have monthly webinars. So October 10th, we'll be having a webinar on operationalizing the Earth Science Week theme in K-12, Geosciences for Everyone. That registration is currently open. Registration email will come out later on this week, probably tomorrow, to all of you, so watch for that. And then also excited to announce that November 7th, we will have a webinar that will be the NASA resources that support instruction of NGSS Earth systems phenomena. And that'll be a wonderful webinar talking about my NASA data. So please watch for that as well. Next slide, please. All right, I think we're ready to go ahead and move forward into today's presentation, which is using the NGSS to change worlds. We're happy to have Matt Krehbiel, Achieve's Director of Science, to kick off our 2019-2020 webinar series. And one more time, I have said it several times, but one more time, please type questions and thoughts into the chat so that we can respond to those. Matt, you want to go ahead and take it away?
Great, Anna. Thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm super excited to be here and talk with everybody today. And topic, of course, is using the NGSS to change worlds. And by the time we get to the end of this, you might know what I mean, and you might not, but we'll figure it out. Just to back up just a little bit, a lot of you probably know who Achieve is, but I want to just, I've also realized that Achieve did a lot of the work of developing NGSS in the background. So I want to just do a quick little bit on that. We're an education nonprofit, been around for more than 20 years. Working in sort of the career and college-ready space, doing a lot of work around policy and technical assistance, convening states, experts, and partners. You may have heard of a project called the American Diploma Project. We're involved, obviously, in standards development and also conducting research around policies and their impact on students. And then, of course, the reason that a lot of folks in this conversation are familiar with Achieve is that Achieve coordinated the development of the NGSS. So we're the organization that brought together the lead states and the writing team to do the development of the NGSS and the organizations and everybody else. We also host the standards on our website. It's not the achieve.org website, it's nextgenscience.org. And so probably a lot of you have been there. And then since that time, recognizing that standards don't do the work by themselves, we've been working hard since the standards were released in 2013 to support NGSS implementation at the state and district level and working across organizations and across the nation. Yeah, as I mentioned, it's on nextgenscience.org. And my name has been come up a couple of times, Matt Krehbiel, I'm the Director of Science. You'll notice my Twitter handle there at Kansas Science Guy. You might ask why a guy who lives in the DC area is at Kansas Science Guy, and that's because I grew up in Kansas. I was a high school science teacher there, teaching every science that there is, I guess, for about 10 years. Yeah, Spencer, thanks for the shout out. And then I was a state science supervisor in Kansas for 5 years and sort of coordinated Kansas's lead state effort and the third state to adopt the standard. So that's sort of how I got into this business. And then, of course, Achieve coordinated the development of the standards, and that's how I got to know Achieve, and that's how I sort of ended up here. Some people like to have more things about titles and other things that are related to me, and I'm not very big into those things. So the only other part that I'm going to give you in terms of the intro of myself is these pictures of me from just about birth up through present day, and it shows a lot of the things that I like to do in my life, from playing Ultimate to music to fun work with chainsaws in trees and snowboarding and being outside and all sorts of things. So that's just a little bit about me. So what we're here to talk about today is actually changing the world, and that's what we're going to look into. So before we get that started, I'm going to make you use the chat box so that you can't just sit and be multitasking next to your computer while we're doing this conversation. So I want you to type in sort of like just one word or phrases or things that are, stuff that, why are you a science teacher? Why do you care about Earth and space science? What is the why that's behind your commitment to be a part of this effort and this movement for kids? So if you could just shoot in, you don't have to like write a whole paragraph about all of it, but just like a phrase at a time, a sentence at a time, just kick those into the chat, and we'll I'll shout them out as they sort of come through, and we'll talk about those things a little bit, because I think it's really important to center on this. I've done sort of this conversation with now thousands of educators and parents and administrators and business leaders all across the United States, and it's actually shocking to me how uniform it is. You know, we have science being accessible for everyone. Reading, Christine put, keeping science relevant for all. Spencer added, I love it when students understand more of something than they ever understood before. The Eureka experience can inspire lifelong learning. Sorry, I'm having trouble keeping up with these. As they're scrolling up in the chat, I'm loving sort of the things that are coming up here. So we have Keith mentioned the more you know, which I think is great. Transitioning teachers to NGSS, helping to implement the NGSS. Science is fun because Mars quakes are cool. I like that. Keep those things coming. Keep them sort of flowing into that chat. And we're going to sort of keep moving on, but I want to see as many of those in that space as we possibly can. I'm loving sort of the stuff that's scrolling by, because I think it's really important to center in on what this is all about, because sometimes we can get into the minutia and we can talk about the details of the 3 dimensions of the standards or things like that, and we sort of miss the big picture. And so I think it's always important for me to center back into what is this really all about and why are we doing this work. And like I said, I've done this many, many times, and you'll see lots of similar things coming up about running to position students to be ready for their lives beyond high school. And obviously science is one of the things that they need to be able to do that. And of course, in this context, we're talking about what in the standards help you to do that. And we've talked about, many of you have probably seen lists like this before, but we have the innovations of these standards that are about figuring out phenomena and problems, doing that sense making part of what this is all about. There's of course the 3 dimensions of the standards themselves and how they are integrated, which is different. They are obviously built on what we've had before, but there's different pieces, and the fact that we're talking about student performances where the 3 of those come together in that figuring out process is an innovation of these standards. You have like these K-12 progressions, so all 3 of those are built across the K-12 progression. They're not just sort of like only the one dimension that was sort of built across that before. And then of course we have connections to ELA and math like we've never had before, and a focus on all standards and for all students. This is especially an innovation at the high school level, where we used to have sort of laundry lists of things that everybody might be able to learn, and these standards really zero in on what do we need all students to know and be able to do by the time they get done with high school. But circling back to these, there's a reason why this one here about figuring out phenomena and problems is the first on the list. It turns out that this stuff right here is sort of the magic sauce to the difference between a teacher delivering information to students and students really taking ownership of the learning and moving things forward. So it really becomes that all of these things that we're talking about as innovations are in service of equity. They're in service of engaging all students, and typically, and especially students who have been marginalized in science classrooms or in any classroom, to really engage with this type of learning and move forward. And the innovation here sets us up to be able to do that. It doesn't do all of the pieces. There's obviously much more that's involved in it than just that, but it is sort of what this is all about. So just a quick sort of quote from the framework, not super quick, but it's, I think, important. Of course, we're talking here about the framework document that is the research base for the standards. I'm just going to read it to you here real quick, just in case you are multitasking. Equity in science education requires that all students are provided with equitable opportunities to learn science and become engaged in science and engineering practices, with access to quality space, equipment, and teachers to support and motivate that learning and engagement, and adequate time spent on science. The issue of connecting students' interests and experiences is particularly important for broadening participation in science. So how do we know how to do that? We have a whole bunch of research that gives us some ideas. So you had a lot of research from the Board of Science Education that fed into the framework document itself. But since the framework was delivered, we have a bunch more support for how to take that framework document and bring it to life in classrooms. So if you haven't seen these reports from the Board on Science Education, you should definitely search for them on the internet and check them out. They're all available, free and publicly available for use online. You can purchase copies if you're a hard copy person, but if you want to go through them all, they're all available, free and publicly available online. So there's information about assessments and what does professional learning look like in this setup. What does implementation look like at the district level? There's a guide for doing that. There's advice around instructional materials in particular that came from a convening that BOSEN achieved together in 2018. And then in 2019, there are 4 more reports that have come out that I think are really applicable to this conversation. There's about learning through citizen science, how people learn too, English learners in STEM subjects, and then science and engineering for grades 6 through 12, investigation and design at the center. So I have to do my job as a Bose alumni to sort of set up and make sure that people are aware of what this research is. And if you were connected to the framework, have read the framework, have dug into it, and are like, okay, what are the implications for the classroom? What does this mean for what happens in the classroom setting? Then science engineering for grades 6 through 12, investigation design at the center is a great next step for you to look for what's there. But in these recent volumes, there's sort of some threads that go through all of them that I think are important and relevant to our conversation. So from those 4 reports, you can come out with some of these key ideas that learning is cultural. So it's more than just feeding information. It's about the environment and the culture that you set up in the classroom. If we want to reach those goals, those things that people were kicking in there at the beginning, we have to attend to equity, or we won't get there. Motivation and identity are important in that process of attending to equity. Another sort of important finding in that space is that just doing science, like a lot of times we talk about hands-on, and hands-on just by itself doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to lead to the science learning that we want. It takes something that is purposeful and is connected to, you know, not just sort of doing science, but you're doing that learning process connected with it. And also sort of a thread through those is that if you really want to change what's happening in classrooms, we need to think about the system. Another way of thinking about that, stealing some work from Phil Bell knowingly, he knows that I'm stealing this after the University of Washington. That figuring out piece means that you're bringing in meaningful phenomena and doing that in a way that connects these 3 dimensions of the standards, but also attends to interest and identity for the students so that they see themselves as, if not scientists, at least having the capacity to do science and engineering. And the result of that and doing that well is sort of leading to meaningful experiences for kids. And it leads to them considering that science is relevant to their lives. Okay. So, next question for you all is, how does a teacher know what a student needs to learn? What does a teacher do if they need to find out what a student needs to learn? So if you have an answer to that question, throw it into the chat, please. One answer that says to read the framework. Formative assessment all along the way. Yeah. Talk to them. Informal assessment of previous knowledge, accessing prior knowledge, find out what they already know, asking lots of questions. Okay, I think you guys already got it. This is fantastic. I mean, really, it's a pretty simple answer here, right? If you want to know what they know, you got to ask them. I think frequently, this is not a super easy process to do. It's not really that simple because you need the right questions. You need to have relationships with kids to get sort of the answers that you're looking for. But you have to ask them. You can't just assume that you know what is happening in that situation. And I think that means asking them more than about what science information they know. You need to have a relationship with kids if you're going to have a hope of sort of changing what their world is. So getting to sort of what we're talking about here a little bit. I always sort of, on my first day of class with kids, I would tell them that during the year I was going to change their world. And they would sort of scoff at such a thing. And then I would clarify that that's actually what teachers do, because everything that you know about the world is all that you know about the world. And if you can give them a new lens to see the world, you have actually fundamentally changed their world. So relationships are super important in this bless you. That includes valuing student experiences. That means valuing the student knowledge that they bring to the classroom, even if it isn't the knowledge that you want them to know coming in. And then it means taking those things and bringing them to bear on student learning. So what happens without that relationship? If you don't have that relationship, you can go into that classroom situation. These are the things that I find most frequently happens in that situation. We see blame, and we see trying to fix what's wrong with the student that comes into the classroom. So blame looks something like this. Something is not going the way that we want it to, whether that be around student behavior or student learning or whatever that's happening in this situation. And of course, I as a teacher, I'm working as hard as I can to make this happen. I'm doing everything that I can to make it work. So if it's not working, you know, because I'm pretty much a rock star, right? I mean, that's obvious. That's what happens in this blame game is you effectively have to say, I'm doing everything that I could possibly do in this situation. And I'm pretty good at what I do, which I think is true for the folks that are thinking that, not me. And so then what follows from that is either the other people, you know, whether those students or parents or, you know, elementary school teachers when you're a middle school teacher, or middle school teachers when you're a high school teacher, or administrators, those other people must not be working as hard, or they just are incompetent. That's what sort of happens in this blame game. And then when we're fixing students, we fall into this deficit mindset trap. And you might hear somebody sort of that's in this space. I know that I've thought these things. I know I've said things similar to this in my life, in my classroom. My students can't. They just aren't motivated. If they came to me with more background knowledge, if they did their job sort of in middle school, then me as a high school teacher, I'd be able to take care of it. Or it's that the parents, they don't care about education, and so they don't support the kids the way they need it. And when we find ourselves in that space, everyone loses. And I include the person with that mindset, because you lose the opportunity to really make a difference for those kids when you find yourself in that deficit mindset space. So, the world, if we're going to change it, harkening back to what I said just a minute ago, smarter people than I have said things like this before. Here from Albert Einstein, the world as we have created is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking. And you have this process here with an opportunity when you position students in that sense-making role, when you have the expectation that they can do that, when you sort of put aside the ideas that you come in with and the assumptions about what students can and can't do, there really is an opportunity here to change not only the worlds of the students, but the world for all of us in the future. And I think it really is that big of an opportunity. It really is that, it really is what's on the table if we can do this right. So that's the inspirational part. Now let's get down to the work. Hopefully the inspirational part. One of the things that I was asked to share in this conversation is sort of what are some of the resources that are out there to help support the work. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Some of the resources that Achieve has, and I'll make sure that people that aren't familiar with some of those resources have opportunity to see some of those. If people have any specific questions about any of this or reactions, please do throw questions about, I would say that anything NGSS is fair game. I will be happy to try to address it at some point before we get to the end, but start getting those questions into the chat now and we will pause here in a minute for question and answer, and we have a stack of questions lined up to get through. So even if it's not directly tied to sort of the piece that we're working on right now, please do add that information into the chat. So one of the new resources that's come out since, it was just coming out, I think the last time I talked with this group in the webinar series last year, is a process and a toolkit for evaluating full instructional materials programs. It's called Next Gen Time, and it was co-developed with Achieve and BSCS Science Learning and the K-12 Alliance, which is a project of West Ed. And all of us had been working in the space of evaluating materials, and we came together to come up with one toolkit and process to evaluate full programs. And these tools, it lives sort of on a different website. It's called nextgentime.org because it's outside of all three of our organizations. But all the tools are freely and publicly available, and there's professional learning guides to support those online. So you can check those things out there. Also in the other set of tools here, we've got, I'll get to the question that just got posted up there in just a second. The science assessment task review tool. So we've done the equipped rubric for science, NGSS lesson screener, and a whole variety of tools for evaluating things. We came out with a set of tools for evaluating assessment tasks. So those are freely and publicly available as well. You're going to start seeing a pattern here in just a second. It's nextgenscience.org/task screener. You can find those materials at that location. And relatedly, there are resources for a task annotation project in science. So taking sort of some of those tools, or we call that TAPS for short, and then actually taking tasks and annotating them, marking them up, and putting sort of the breakdown of where those tools are and, where sort of like how does this assessment attend to equity? How does this assessment sort of match up with the 3 dimensions of the standards? Where in this assessment is a student making sense of a phenomena? All those sorts of things are there. So you can, I think you'll have to actually click one more time after you go to that link at nextgenscience.org/assess. But at that space, you should see the TAPS project, and you can find, there's not only examples at 3 through 5, 6 through 9, and 10 through 12, but there's also sort of 2-page documents about what are phenomena like in assessment tasks. What does it mean to attend to equity in assessment tasks, and those sorts of things are on that TAPS website as well. Thanks for adding those links into the chat as well. The rest of these links are actually the same sort of a thing. So all this thing is nextgenscience.org/, and then the first one is /HQ/NGSS, and that's where we have all the quality examples that the science peer review panel has identified. So we talked about the science peer review panel last time, but it's a group of 50 people from all over the United States, some of who are actually on this conversation, who review materials using the equipped rubric for science. We've been doing it for 3 years. We've been providing free feedback to folks that have free and publicly available units. We've reviewed about 300 units over the course of the 3 years, and the bar is pretty high. We have 18 units now that are there that are K through 12, most content areas, and all those examples are freely and publicly available. You can grab them, use them, download them, do all of that information. One of the things that we would ask from this group in particular is we actually are short on Earth-based science units. We would love if you have Earth-based science units that are freely and publicly available to review. If you go to this /PRP link, you will be able to find an easy way to get those reviewed. The review is free. It's confidential. If it doesn't hit the marks, or if you're worried that your materials aren't good enough, you will get free confidential feedback if it doesn't hit the mark. If it hits the mark, and then you get free publicity for your good work, and it goes up online publicly. So we would definitely be interested in earth-based science materials in particular at all grade levels in that space. If you just want to find our tools quickly, for all those tools that I mentioned for evaluating things, the Next Gen Time has a link there, the equip rubric, the task screener, the NGSS lesson screener. Just go to nextgenscience.org/eval, and you'll find those tools for evaluation there. We've had tools around implementation at the district and state level for a long time. That some of them came out right when the standards came out or shortly thereafter, but we've kept adding to that space. So it's just nextgenscience.org/imp. There's a implementation guide for both states and districts to sort of dig through what your priorities are and what to focus on in implementation based on that guide to implementing the NGSS from the National Academies book. So it's all connected to that. If you're looking for how do I talk about the next generation science standards with my district or my community, go to the nextgenscience.org/com, and you'll be redirected to the communications site, which includes links to parent guides that you can pass out to, send home with kids or share with on your district website. There's tools there for talking about the messages that you want to highlight and connect with your community at that website. We've got a whole bunch of things that have been, there are wide ranges of things at the resource library. There's a principles guide there. There's just a whole variety of things at the resource library link, so you can get there. If you want some videos about the Equip Rubric for Science, or there's a couple of classroom videos there, some videos about what the NGSS are all about, just go to nextgenscience.org/video. So just sort of a highlight of all the things that we have there. And thanks to the folks for including those links as hyperlinks into the chat as well. One other thing, and then we're going to get to some questions and answers, and then we'll have some more conversation there. So I'm going to actually skip this part to here. So be thinking about what questions you have, and I've got a couple that are in there that I'll scroll back and grab in just a second. But if you have other questions that you want to talk about, anything related to NGSS implementation, or resources that you're looking for, programs that you're looking for, any of those sorts of things, just fire those questions into the chat, and we'll get back to them in just a second. I first want to talk to you about an opportunity to achieve professional learning. So in addition to creating with states and education leaders these tools and resources for folks, we also go out and do professional learning to support their use. We do right now have some support for going out and doing 2-day any of these Equip suite of tools, the professional learning. Specifically, that grant money is it's tied to working in schools that either have greater than 50% Black or Latino population, or greater than 50% free and reduced lunch population. So if you're interested and your school, or you know somebody whose school might be interested in that, you have an opportunity to just send an email to ngss@achieve.org. Give sort of in that email some details about yourself, your district, what your overall plan is for implementing the NGSS, and how a 2-day Equip training session might sort of help and support that. And we'll be picking from some of those folks, districts, to get 2 days of Equip professional learning for up to 100 people in that space. So if you are a small district, we would definitely look for you to partner with other districts. We don't have a huge professional learning team, so we're looking to really have a big impact where we go. So if you're a medium-sized or large district, I think you might be able to fill that up. But if you're a small district, think about partnering with other districts in that space to make that happen. So pretty cool opportunity. This is the first time we've actually publicly announced it, so we're hoping that we get some more input into this and get some people dialed up and ready to go, and then we can schedule that over the next year or so. If you are all interested, you don't meet those criteria, but you're all interested in sort of professional learning from Achieve around some of these things, this link here to our services page will get you sort of a broader description of what we do and how we do it, and then you can follow up from there. Quick question Monica asked, is there a flyer about these opportunities that we could share? I don't actually have a flyer to share, but if you, Monica, I know that you have my email, you could let me know and we can maybe put something together, or we can share it out. If somebody is interested in that, then we can probably connect that. Another question from Keith, is the professional learning aimed at particular grade levels or as K-12? It's absolutely K-12. We've done that in K-12 situations. We can also do it in a grade band specific situation. I think the biggest thing that we're interested in that space is that it sort of supports a broader implementation plan in your district so that you have sort of a reason for why that grade band is there and what they're doing. And also, you know, sort of that it ties in with this, our general sort of what the grant funding is supporting. Checking to see if there's any other questions related to that.
Hey, Matt, this is Aida. I had a question that came to me privately in the chat. So this one was thinking about the comments that you were making about the blame game. And it's kind of asking, you know, what suggestions would you share about how educators can begin to sort of reframe the situations to focus on potential teaching problems when things aren't going great, rather than assuming that it's, you know, the student can't do this and the student isn't engaged and the student isn't motivated. And how do we help flip those educators around in their thinking too? What's in NGSS that will help us with that?
That's a great question. I think there's a couple of things that I can think of. I don't know that these will necessarily apply to every situation. I think a lot of it has to do with your sort of mindset and the framework of how things are set up from the beginning. So to the importance of the sense-making process, you know, a lot of the high quality materials that we have sort of identified, and there's also things that are out there. When you are, instead of coming at students with information that they should learn, you come into that conversation requesting information from students about where they're at, and then you sort of facilitate that conversation in a way that you move toward the information that you're set up to do, which is not an easy skill necessarily, and it's something that takes practice. It sets up an environment or in your classroom where the students are, the information that they have is valued. And I think that's actually a key. Like, there's a lot of this that is sort of infrastructure of how you do what you do from the beginning. It's hard once you get into the reactive space to sort of back off. I would also sort of say, I'm sure there are also other people in this space that are on this call that have ideas about this. And if you have ideas, you should totally throw them in the chat. On top of that, then I think part of this is about how you structure the class around dialogue and interactions with students, and how you make it clear to students that their perspective is valued moving forward. Those things are tough to do, one classroom at a time. It's a lot more difficult to do that just in your own classroom than it is to do like across a science department or across a school in terms of what you're doing, for it to really to have the type of impact around changing the culture for what you're getting into. And so like there are good things coming up there around, you know, wrapping student experiences into the phenomena, honoring experiences that they're bringing to the table. But a lot of it is sort of the mindset that you bring to the classroom. Is it students are going to come to me with misconceptions and I'm going to fix them? Or is it students have come to us with funds of knowledge from all different levels, and we use that to build on, not to break down and sideline or minimize, but we're going to use that information to build on and head us in the right direction. Is that sort of getting at what you were thinking about, Ada?
Yeah, that really helps a lot. Thanks for running through that with us.
Yeah. I'm hopping back to Spencer's question. He says, for the high quality design, should we be looking more at the unit level, daily use lesson level, multi-day lesson level? In other words, what's the best thing to submit to the peer review panel? You know, my best advice there is, you know, we are focusing on really units that are materials that set up to make sure that they have enough there that it's clear that students are figuring out a phenomenon or designing a solution to a problem in that process. So the amount of material that it takes to set that up and make that happen is what is needed. We would love some shorter pieces to be submitted. A lot of the things that have actually risen to the level that they've been posted are longer units. Some of them are a little bit shorter, so it's less about the actual length of it than it is about what's happening in the materials. And if you look at the equip rubric criteria, and you can look at the examples that are up there, and with every example that's up there, there's also a full equip feedback report. So you can see the unit, you can see what sort of the peer review panel gave as feedback about that unit, and you can get some ideas then about what type of feedback you might be getting on your materials. Great, thanks for adding that, Ed. Ed added that it's also just strategic to look at problems as teaching problems. The teacher has more opportunity or power to change themselves and to change the students. And when you think about how you can change yourself, you probably also can lead to changing the world for students as well. So I'm curious if folks have any other questions. Ed, I know you were paying attention to questions. I don't know if you have other questions that you'd like me to bring up that I missed. I saw there were some earlier. I don't know if you want to unmute, if there's anything that I missed that you could let me know about, and we can talk about that now, or we can move to the next thing too. Okay, Ed, okay, there's an identity question. So, okay, there it is. Can you expand on the role of identity in learning as you see it? What is it and how can it be influenced in positive directions? I'd like to hear your thoughts. I think it's actually similar to sort of what we talked about with Ada's question earlier. It's really about you know, how do we position kids to think that this stuff is relevant to their lives? And when instruction is really driven around them making sense of the phenomena. So like from a student's perspective, they are, you might walk into a classroom and ask a kid what they're doing that day. And instead of telling you, like, I'm learning about Newton's third law, they might tell you something about the problem or the phenomena that they're figuring out. And I think in that sense, then it becomes something that they own, and they start in this process seeing themselves as somebody who can do this work, that science is something that's relevant to their lives, and it's a part of who they are, and it's a possibility to make that connection. And I think that's particularly important for students that have been marginalized in this space, who may not have role models that look like them to emulate. Or that they want to emulate in their sort of day-to-day lives, and to give them the opportunity to experience what it's like to be a scientist or an engineer at their age can make a real impact long term. Another question in the chat is the word hope that's in a part of the presentation here, and for me, this is sort of the hope for the future, that this is an opportunity to make a difference in ways that we haven't yet done, and that it's not just the standards, but the standards are a lever to get us there. And if we take an opportunity that's presented in the standards because of this research that really pushes us in the direction of teaching and learning that engages students of all different types and backgrounds, then there's a real opportunity to impact the future of a lot of kids, the future of science and engineering as fields, because we will increase the diversity of people that are represented in those spaces, and that will bring in unique and different perspectives on people who maybe wouldn't have thought of themselves as scientists or engineers are brought into that space. And it has a potential then, of course, to impact at the national level as well, with more people paying attention to science information and understanding how it's connected to their lives. And I think that it really is, for me, it is a hope in a time when I don't always have hope. So I'm going to move toward what I think is my ending quote for this conversation, and then I think that there are a number of slides that geoscience teachers folks want to use at the wrap up of this. So I'm gonna talk about this quote a little bit, and definitely interested in anything else that folks have to say. So don't stop chatting if you want to. This is a quote that's actually really hard for me the first time I read the first sentence, because I like to help people, and that's part of why I got into teaching. But the quote is, if you have come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us walk together. And I think that sort of encapsulates what it means to, walk together with your students if we're going to make these shifts and changes possible, if we're going to change the world. So we're going to dig now into I'm going to take it back to Ada and let you talk through the end of the webinar slides. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Matt, so much for giving us some inspiration here at the beginning of the school year, and also a peek into some of the resources that maybe we haven't had an opportunity yet to explore that are available through nextgen.science.org. So that's really a great introduction. And I know there were a couple of times here when I felt like we're trying to copy down URLs, but the slides will all be available after this webinar, as will the recording of the entire webinar. So don't feel like you need to go back and get those correct URLs written down. You can always go back to those slides, and they'll remain posted for many years to come. So please do that. We do have a post-webinar survey that we would really very much appreciate your feedback on. So you can see the link there, pretty simple, nagt.org/231532. So nagt.org/231532. Please share your feedback. There are some questions on there that ask you about opportunities for future webinars, and we would really love to hear from you, because this webinar series is all about our community as a whole, and providing webinars that are important for our community, that are useful for our community, and that help us all to grow in our practice. So please do give us feedback there. Matt, you want to move forward one? Again, we have 2 upcoming webinars that have already been announced. October 10th, an important conversation that will really, I think, build on today's conversation, operationalizing the Earth Science Week theme in K-12. The Earth Science Week theme for this year is Geoscience is for Everyone. And this is going to be a panel discussion. That panel discussion will be chaired by Chris Atchison, and registration is already open for that webinar, so you'll be able to find that. I'll be sending out an email with the registration link tomorrow to you all, so watch for that. And then November 7th, NASA Resources Support Instruction of NGSS Earth System Phenomena. So this will be an excellent tour through the My NASA data resources in a way that will help us all access them and implement them in our classrooms, integrate them into our practices. So I encourage you to watch for those 2 upcoming webinars. Move forward one. And if you have missed any of our past webinars in the past 4 years, as I said at the beginning, this is our 5th year, you can access all of them in the archived version with the bit.ly/webinar NGSS link. Next slide, please. And announcing the NAGT 2019-2020 webinar series. So here are some upcoming webinars from Integrate, Earth Education for a Sustainable Future. That is coming up on the 17th of September. There's the link for registration there. You can also access that from nagt.org. And then please see events that are happening at GSA if you're going to be at GSA in Phoenix, and other NAGT events. Carla, do you want to jump in here and give us some information about Nesta again, please?
Do we have that slide? There we go.
There we go. Oh, great.
Perfect. So yes, Nesta also runs a series of webinars throughout the year. And in fact, this evening, there is a webinar, if you're up for a second webinar, around teen astronomy cafes. This is a really fascinating program, and they're having kids use Jupyter notebooks to explore astronomy topics. So if you wanted to find out about Jupyter notebooks, this might be a good webinar for you. Also, if you're interested in these sort of teen cafes, teen science cafes have been presented at a lot of different places. This one in particular focuses on astronomy. Well, stick the URL in the chat in a moment, but you can go to our webinar page to see other webinars that we have been involved with. We'll record this one as well tonight, and there will be a page dedicated to it with the recording and slides and so forth.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carla. And then I will just mention that the third sponsor of this webinar series is the American Geosciences Institute. And you can see Ed Robeck's contact information there, but I encourage you to go to the AGI website and explore through the education and outreach information that's there. There are links to workshops, there are links to events, there are links to resources and lesson plans. Also go to the Earth Science Week websites and look there for the upcoming Earth Science Week activities, contests, lesson plans, and also some new material that's coming out that's going to focus on some wonderful if-then ambassadors. So lots of new information, lots of new resources coming from the American Geosciences Institute. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. Thank you for your thoughtful conversation, your thoughtful questions, and I'm going to just take a quick peek here at the chat. Are there any last minute questions that anyone would like to ask or thoughts? You can also unmute your mic if you'd like and jump in here in our last couple of minutes. You want to unmute your mic? It's the very bottom left corner. Okay, not hearing any. Matt, do you want to make any final wrap-up questions or comments here?
I just want to say thanks again to AGI and NAGT and Nesta and for inviting me to be a part of the conversation. And I am excited for another school year and excited for the work that all the folks on the line are going to be doing with kids to make a difference and to change their world moving forward. So thank you all so much, and go forth and conquer.
Yeah, thanks very much for joining us and for your very thoughtful and thought-provoking presentation today. Andrew, on the CERC side, anything that you would like to share with our participants here?
Sorry, just trying to mute myself. So I was just going to answer the one question.
Guy back there making sure everything runs well. So yay, thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, no problem. So I was just about to answer the question that just came to the chat about upcoming activities at GSA, which is down in the chat. There's a link to that for GSA and such. So yeah, so NAGT will be at GSA, and we will be sharing a booth with Nesta, so you can visit us both there as well.
There are also a couple sessions I'll bring up since we still have a couple seconds here at GSA on Sunday. all day Sunday, starting at 8 o'clock, running through 3 o'clock. The GeoTeach workshop is available. Carla, you want to say a couple things about that?
Absolutely. I don't know if we have web access. If we don't, that's fine. We could bring up the page. But basically, we have a couple of phenomenal speakers as well as database activities that'll be going on. It is free for K-12 teachers, and they can still register and participate. You can find information about that by going to nestanet.org on the homepage of the Nesta website, and it's posted on there. You'll see GeoTeach workshop at GSA.
Or feel free to reach out to Carla or to me. And then also, if you're at GSA, Tuesday morning from 9 to noon, Carla, Ed, and I are convening a session that will be filled with really wonderful geoscience demos and activities, hands-on, not the sit and listen to talks, but we're going to be hands-on with all these activities in the special presentation space in the exhibit hall A, I believe it is. So check for that Tuesday morning. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. Again, thank you, Matt, for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing everyone on our October and November webinars. Thanks very much. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Take care.